terrifying break-in results in multiple victims.
I swung the door open and found her laying there.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg.
Once we had called the room clear, we found a deceased individual.
Despite first impressions, the evidence suggests this isn't quite what it seems.
Things that were present at the scene were adding up to a home invasion.
We found a bunch of torn up pictures. There was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
Bad.
As the investigation unfolds, detectives realize their murder victim might have put his trust in the wrong person.
She had created a fraudulent email address so that she could steal money from him.
And there could be more than one victim.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes, both tied to the same female.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
She was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
At 1:26 p.m. on August 10th, 2023, police in Zanesville, Ohio receive an emergency call from a woman named Deborah Frazier.
911, where's emergency? I think someone's in the apartment. It was unlocked, and there's stuff everywhere, and I can't find my boyfriend. And okay, Diane, I'm going to stay on the phone with you, but I need you to back out of that apartment right now. I say so much. Oh my God! Oh my God! Oh, you didn't have an active invasion.
As I was en route, they did give out additional information of two men.
They were wearing hoodies and masks. One had gloves, she said.
Within minutes, police arrive at Deborah's address.
I started scanning the area. Every car that I was passing, didn't see anybody matching that description leaving the area.
I began knocking on the door. Once I did, I heard a female moaning, and I continued pounding on the door, identifying myself as the police. I heard her voice say she was not able to open the door. I checked it. It was unlocked, so I swung the door open. And then I found her laying there.
She was holding her left leg. It was apparent she had a bullet hole through her jeans.
She was shot in the upper part of the leg, thigh area. You know, you get shot in the right place, you could bleed to death. So we're tending to her.
I saw a revolver laying on the floor a few feet away from her. What I assumed was the assailant's firearm or hers, but we knew she wasn't a threat.
At that point, other officers were on scene and paramedics had showed up. She was placed on a gurney and moved to the hospital as quick as we can.
Police quickly search the two-bedroom apartment to make sure the assailants are gone.
When we got to the back bedroom, it was dark. As I entered, I saw the closet. One of the closet doors was open. A lot of people hide in closets and showers over my career, so I kind of put my attention on that. I noticed a form laying on the floor. It looked like a human under blankets. Pulled the blankets back, and at that time we found a deceased individual.
He was wrapped in black trash bags, black duct tape, a blanket, and there was some blood on the carpet.
Officers' immediate priorities are to secure the crime scene and assist their surviving victim.
I was coming down the hallway, and the paramedics were still attending to Deborah on the floor. Our Detective Bureau Sergeant Phil Michael was there, and one of our evidence technicians, Detective Moore. I said, hey, we have a dead body in the bedroom. Deborah, she overheard that and asked, who's back there?
We weren't going to volunteer any information that witnesses might not know. We want to hear what their story is first.
They loaded her up on a gurney And at this point, I'm still trying to collect information. I asked her if she lives there with anybody, and she advised that she does. Her boyfriend, Tom, she was frantic. She had a gunshot wound to her leg. So getting a whole lot of information out of her, it was hard to do, but I was able to get enough to know that Tom lived there, and she hadn't been there in a couple of days.
And we learned Deborah, she was 35, Tom was in his mid-60s. There was quite a considerable age gap between the two.
As Deborah is rushed to the hospital, investigators examine the deceased victim on scene. A few feet from the body, they find a wallet with an ID for 66-year-old Thomas Waddell.
Looking at his BMV picture, it was easy to identify him as being the deceased.
It's just gone from a home invasion robbery to, now somebody's wrapped up in a blanket. There's going to be a lot more things that are going to need to be done that we need to check out and investigate.
Thomas Wayne Waddell was born July 20th, 1957, and grew up in the greater Cincinnati area.
He had one sister, two loving parents. Him and his sister were very close. They were like best friends.
His parents were religious, Nazarene church, I believe, so he was always in church, close with his family.
He liked to sing, he loved music, he loved woodworking and working with his hands. He's very creative.
Tom graduated from Western Hills High School in 1975. 3 years later, he married his high school sweetheart and started a family of his own. To support them, he began working as a retail manager.
He built stores for Walmart. He did a lot of third shift, so like when he was home, he was sleeping or he was hanging out with us.
My dad was a really good father. Going fishing, going camping, working in the wood shop with him. He just liked to have a good time with his family.
Being a father came naturally to Tom, but being a husband did not, resulting in the first of multiple divorces.
But he did not like to be by himself. He was married 5 times.
I do not know why my dad's marriages fell apart. I feel like he was looking for something, whether it was with this woman or the next woman.
In 2015, after his children had grown up and started their own families, Tom moved to the town of Zanesville for a fresh start.
He was a manager at Kroger, and everyone respected him and did what he asked of them and had no problems. He made friends easily. He also liked to rescue dogs. At one point in time, he had 12 dogs that he rescued from shelters. I mean, Dad would take his shirt off his back to go help someone. That's how he ended up meeting Deborah Frazier.
They met at work. She's obviously significantly younger than him. She would have been an associate. He was a manager.
Miss Frazier was born and raised in Zanesville. She worked various jobs as a clerk or as a bagger.
Tom found himself drawn to his reserved 33-year-old coworker.
Deborah Frazier was intriguing. She didn't have a big support group, and she kind of put herself on an island. There were only a couple people that she was close with.
At first, Tom was only trying to help Deborah, who was struggling financially.
I think he just was trying to help her, and then he built that relationship and that bond with her, and that's how the relationship started.
They had a relationship. It was not continuous because she'd moved away to Florida for a period of time.
By the summer of 2023, the couple had moved in together. Tom retired from his job at the grocery store and seemed to have finally found the right woman.
If you look in the apartment, there's pictures of them together. They had a cookbook which said, Tom and Debbie's cookbook. So it was clear they were in a relationship.
But now, their lives have been torn apart. In the aftermath of an apparent break-in, Tom is dead and Debbie is being rushed to the hospital with a gunshot wound. But a closer look at Tom's body brings the timeline of events into question.
I could recognize from my experience that this individual had been deceased longer than the duration of this call.
It was an active, ongoing home invasion and her being shot. It seemed unlikely that they would have taken the time to try to wrap a body up. Now, stuffing it in a closet, pushing it under a bed, maybe, but to wrap it up in plastic bags and then hide it in a closet, those things were not adding up.
The way things are starting to unfold, obviously we're going to have more questions.
Coming up, Deborah relives the attack.
I was so scared. The one assailant pulled out a gun.
And their victim provides crucial evidence to help identify his killer.
There was a hair found between his fingers, long and dark.
Police in Zanesville, Ohio, are investigating the death of Tom Waddell, a retail store manager whose girlfriend Deborah Frazier was also shot. The first piece of evidence is a gun found at the scene.
The gun we found when Deborah was moved was a .22 caliber revolver, an older model. It was fully loaded with 9 rounds, 2 of which had been spent.
But there is little else to suggest this was a robbery.
There was still money in drawers. There were valuable guns all over the place.
I found a TV in the back bedroom just leaning against the wall that was still connected to a DVD player. When it was laying on the floor, I was able to develop 10 latent lifts on that TV and send them to BCI for an examination.
A lot of times when you have home invasions, they look completely wrecked. Mr. Waddell's apartment was pretty well kept. The couch cushions weren't pulled up and thrown everywhere like people were looking for something particular. It was just kind of like things were pushed around, disheveled, and then there were some torn shreds of photos, actually of Mr. Waddell and Ms. Frazier, which seemed odd for a home invader.
Further inspection of the crime scene raises more red flags.
In one of the bottom kitchen cabinets, I found an open box of trash bags. They have blue, like, plastic straps on them, and those is what the same kind that was on Thomas Waddell's body.
We found black duct tape that was a couple cabinets over from where the trash bags were found.
That also didn't make sense because someone who's ransacking an apartment or wrapping up a body is not going to return the tape to the cabinet where it came from.
I just had that feeling that, this was staged.
Hoping to reconcile the discrepancies, investigators stop by Deborah's hospital room to speak with her before she's taken in for surgery.
Today I came back after being gone for like a couple days. I was visiting a friend, and then when I came back, I noticed the door was unlocked. I went in because I didn't know if Tom maybe just forgot to lock the door or whatever. I've been texting him and calling him, and there was no response. And then I saw things were messed up, and that's what I decided to call 911.
Okay. And tell me about you getting shot.
Well, I saw them when they...
Saw who?
The assailants, the two yahoos, such,
She said the first guy was wearing gloves, a hoodie, and a ski mask, but she could make out that he was a white guy. The second guy she couldn't give a very good description of.
It was kind of like a little bit of a scuffle, so I tried to grab the gun.
By the barrel?
I think so, because when he aimed, I was just trying to grab it so it wouldn't, if it went off, it wouldn't be in my direction, but I'm not that strong, so he ended up firing into my leg.
Okay.
With doctors ready to prepare Deborah for surgery, detectives wrap up their interview and collect Deborah's phone and bloody clothing into evidence. After leaving the hospital, they canvass Tom and Deborah's neighborhood looking for potential witnesses.
That apartment complex is pretty nice, well-maintained, and is on a part of the city that we don't have a lot of crime.
No one reported hearing a gunshot, no one heard any type of struggles, no one saw anybody running.
There are some ring cameras that are accessible. They see nothing on those.
So the story that she's told us, the statements we've got from witnesses, it's not adding up to be the home invasion robbery, minus the commotion on the 911 call of two people that would have allegedly just murdered someone and then shot someone else that make absolutely no sound at all. So we're going to want to continue to look further.
The following morning, the medical examiner conducts an autopsy on Tom Waddell. Detectives hope it will provide some much-needed answers.
It's not until they get to the autopsy that they realize how well wrapped up this body is. It's wrapped in plastic and then plastic bags and then a comforter.
It's not something that you could do rather quickly. I mean, you know, it's going to take time to get him under those many layers.
We want to deal with each layer that he's wrapped in separately, looking for evidence and trying to figure out what is going on in this case.
There was a hair found in Tom's left hand between his fingers that was long and dark.
That is completely different than his hair, so that was put and packaged so that the laboratory could look at it. And he has a blue strap around each lower leg.
We weren't sure who did it, and we weren't sure how they moved him back there, but we thought that the Velcro straps could have been used to pull him back there.
With the wrappings removed, the cause of death becomes clear.
Seeing all the blood on his face and in his hair, we figure that is where the injury is. So just cleaning his hair, I find a gunshot wound.
The morning after 66-year-old Tom Waddell was found dead in his apartment, the medical examiner in Licking County, Ohio, has discovered how he was killed.
It was determined that he had died from a single gunshot to the back of the head, a .22 long rifle round.
The bullet matches the same caliber that was removed from Miss Frazier's leg, which matches the gun that was found at the scene.
Most importantly, the medical examiner is able to determine how long ago Tom was murdered.
There is a series of steps that the muscles go through in rigor mortis. This gentleman had the stage where his rigor is waning away. So that, to me, meant that he had been dead approximately 24 to 36 hours prior to when I'm looking at him.
Sometime between 8 p.m. on August 9th and 2 a.m. on August 10th, approximately 12 to 16 hours prior to us getting the call.
At that point, that didn't make sense based on the timeline. Why would you kill somebody, get it to the extent of taking your time to wrap them up, put them in a closet, and then come back a whole day later? That didn't make a lot of sense. Why wouldn't you just do it right now and distance yourself from the scene?
The evidence suggests Deborah might not be telling the truth about what happened.
it's starting to look like she might have a hand in it. We don't know exactly yet, but her story isn't adding up. We're going to want to continue to look further, try to find any type of motive that she might have, so we would obtain a search warrant for her phone.
We found in her wallet a card, and it had writing on it, and it was, I believe, a 6-digit code. And Sergeant Michael, who conducts the data extractions, he entered the PIN code, and it unlocked the phone.
They find a question that was put into her phone, being researched on the internet.
It was 8:16 a.m. on the morning of the 10th. How long does GSR stay on the skin?
When you talk about GSR, you're talking about gunshot residue. That was definitely an indicator to me that she had more involvement than what she was saying. Now, whether she was the actual person who shot him at that point, we didn't know, but she definitely, in my mind, had some involvement in this homicide.
That afternoon, once her wounds have been stabilized, detectives ask Deborah to repeat her version of events.
Deborah tells us that she had gone to hang out with her friend, John Anderson.
We drove around for a while, and then I ended up asking him if I could just spend the night. We played video games, we watched TV. He's an old friend from my early college years.
She told us the next day, after staying with Mr. Anderson, she returns to her residence, and it's at that point in time that she finds Tom, and this whole home invasion occurs.
When was the last time you ever fired a gun?
Last time I ever fired a gun? When I was wrestling, trying to get the gun pointed away from me, I had a hold of it when it went off.
Well, what do you think happened to Tom?
I honestly don't know. I even tried calling today.
Well, Tom was shot and killed. It's alright, you can take a minute.
In my opinion, it sounded like she was fake crying. It didn't seem real at all.
Why are you searching? How long does gunshot residue stay on my hands? Yesterday morning at 8 in the morning. Listen, you did.
I didn't.
Now I'm going to ask you to be 100% honest with me. Did you have something to do with his death?
No.
And I'm going to be as straight as possible. I've probably been a cop now for about 20 years. This isn't the first murder investigation that I've ever handled. It's not going to be the last. There was no home invasion robbery, okay? There was absolutely none. So, you've already locked yourself into the biggest lie. Here's your chance to unwind it and tell the truth. We know that you were involved. You shot him with the .22.
I didn't.
Yes, you did, right in the top of the head.
I didn't do it.
You can't even explain why you have those search history in your phone. Stand in my shoes here for a second. How's that look on you?
Bad.
Backed into a corner, Deborah still maintains her innocence. When pressed for more information about John Anderson, the man she'd stayed with the night before finding Tom's body, she insists he's just a friend. But detectives wonder if something more was going on, and if it led to Tom's murder.
We need to go get John right away before he gets and talks to her. So if he is involved, that, their stories don't change.
Coming up, detectives interview Deborah's other boyfriend.
Did you guys sleep in the same room? We did.
And another mysterious death is revealed.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes.
A day after Tom Waddell was found murdered, detectives visit John Anderson in Zanesville, Ohio, to ask about his relationship with suspect Deborah Frazier.
At the time that interview was happening, there's still open questions. And among those open questions is she the trigger man? Is she not? Is she just involved? Is there another person?
He's her alibi. He definitely could be an accomplice.
So the reason I want to talk to you is in reference to Deborah. Start from when you know, I guess how you know her, how long you've known her and stuff like that.
She and I met in late 2012. She and I were in a relationship for about 10 years or more.
Okay. Did you guys break up then, I take it?
No.
Oh, are you currently still boyfriend and girlfriend?
Technically, yes.
John confirms he received a call from Deborah on August 9th.
John told us that Deborah was very panicked. She was stressed and he just wanted to help her in any way that he could. But he did that by being there for her and driving her around all night.
He drove her up to Dresden, which is a town about 10 minutes north of Zanesville.
What made you decide to drive to Dresden? Did she request that?
She did. I thought she wanted to get out of the house.
What happened after that?
She and I drove back to Oakland and we just went to sleep. We went to bed.
Did you guys sleep in the same room?
We did.
He told us he dropped her off the next morning at her apartment. He couldn't remember an exact time.
We asked him if he knows who Tom was. He had no clue. So we laid it out to Johnny that, you know, Deborah and Tom were in a relationship, and he just seemed floored. He just couldn't believe what was being told to him.
His understanding from Miss Frazier was that she was working as a home health care live-in for Mr. Waddell because he had dementia. And so he is very, very shocked by all this.
And you've never been in her apartment at all?
Never.
So, the only reason I ask you that, and I don't have a reason to doubt you at any point right now, is because we collected some biological evidence that's going to have some DNA on it. Would your DNA be found in that apartment on any type of weapon or any type of duct tape or trash bags or anything like that?
No.
Anderson gives them permission to search his cell phone, and they are able to use the geolocation services to essentially track and verify everything that he says.
There was no evidence in the apartment that had anything to do with him, and it truly seemed like he had nothing to do with the offense other than being manipulated and lied to by Deborah Frazier.
With John's statement, investigators have enough circumstantial evidence to get warrants for Deborah and Tom's digital records.
There were more than 20 warrants that were issued to collect information on emails, phone records, location services, financial records.
We get the bank records, and there was some pretty large monetary withdrawals from the bank. And Mr. Waddell being a retiree on a fixed income, those type of expenditures, not consistent generally with a person who's on a fixed income.
Deborah's phone contains evidence she may have been behind the withdrawals.
We were able to see that she had created a PNC fraudulent claims at gmail.com email address where she was fabricating emails, we believe, to show Tom so that she could steal money from him.
The emails stop, strangely enough, on the 9th. There's nothing after that to Mr. Waddell about fraud. And it really starts to add up as to, okay, what was the motive behind Ms. Frazier killing Mr. Waddell?
Investigators request a full extraction of Deborah's account from her provider, including any deleted data. They also returned to the scene of the crime to search for any evidence that might have been overlooked.
Thomas Waddell had been shot in the back of the head. We just didn't know where.
Just inside the front door, right beside where Deborah Frazier was laying when we found her, was a recliner. The recliner that was facing the TV there in the living room had a blanket folded over the top of the headrest. And when we moved the blanket, we found a blood stain.
Looking how tall Tom was, where his actual gunshot wound was at on the top of his head, that suggests that Tom was sitting in his recliner when he was shot.
One mystery has been solved, but the discovery creates a new one.
Tom was a big guy, and Deborah's not big, and so even moving his body from the recliner and into the bedroom was going to be a very significant task for Deborah.
We believe she had some help getting him there.
Detectives determined Deborah's boyfriend, John Anderson, was not involved, but lab results provide another potential accomplice.
The prints from the television come back, and they come back to a guy from Florida named David Grantham.
This particular individual had some petty theft crimes and some receiving stolen property crimes. So it's not a far leap.
This was a lead that we were going to have to track down.
Days into their investigation of Tom Waddell's murder, detectives have a new suspect, Florida resident David Grantham.
We're looking to see whether or not Mr. Grantham had a good alibi, and in this case he had a rock-solid alibi, and that was that he was in fact dead.
According to Florida records, David Grantham died in February 2021, 2.5 years ago.
He died of a drug overdose that was called in by his roommate at the time.
And when detectives learn that roommate's name, it's one they recognize.
I called down to Tavares. I had their police department forward the information, and when they sent me the investigation, I found that Deborah Frazier was the person that called 911.
She had recently moved back from Florida to Ohio, which would explain why Grantham's fingerprints were still on the TV.
You now have two separate individuals that died under suspicious causes at this point that are both tied to the same female.
It all seemed a little odd. When reading the reports, it didn't seem that they thought there was any type of foul play.
Is there any evidence of foul play in Mr. Grantham's death? No. Does this coincidence make it go from not suspicious death to, well, maybe something might have happened? Maybe, but in the world of prosecution, we don't deal with might have happened.
It was, I believe, deemed to be a drug overdose, and she just happened to be the person that was living with him at the time that found him and called it in.
To investigators, one thing seems certain: Deborah's involvement in Tom's murder. And when the requested data from her email account comes in, some deleted entries confirm those suspicions.
Some of the other searches that were found on Deborah Frazier's phone included how to load a revolver or a gun, what size ammo do you need, what if the ammo is wrong, how to uncock the hammer on a revolver, on a .22, and maybe most importantly, the worst place to get hit in the head.
To me, it suggested that she had been planning something, at least for days, but some of the searches went back as far as a week and a half.
Deborah's account also reveals she was connected to Wi-Fi at the apartment she shared with Tom on the night of his death. For detectives, the only thing missing now is a proverbial smoking gun.
After sending all of our evidence off to the crime lab, we were able to get back the hair that was discovered during the autopsy, both in the Velcro and Tom's hands, and a fingerprint off of the duct tape. And that led back to Deborah Frazier. And there's only one way that it could have gotten there.
However, the question of how Deborah managed to pull off the murder on her own still remains.
Based upon the evidence where the blood was located and the nature of the entry wound into the head, we believe that she walked up behind him. He is either asleep in the recliner or watching a TV show, and she gets to a very close range and she pulls the trigger, killing him. The Velcro straps were important because you can imagine that what had happened is she had used those as leverage to try to drag his body on her own to the closet. I think it was at the point where she started to move him that it really dawned on her that her plan had a lot of flaws and she was not going to be able to get him out of that house by herself. And if she couldn't get him out of the house by herself, how was she going to be able to explain it?
That's where she came up with the home invasion.
On September 7th, 2023, Deborah Frazier is arrested at the hospital.
So after Deborah is medically cleared from the hospital to be released, she's arrested.
Ms. Frazier is charged with aggravated murder, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and 1 count of abuse of a corpse.
Deborah immediately asks for an attorney, and police and prosecutors know their work isn't done.
We want to be thorough. We want to make sure we have a solid prosecution. You only get one shot at it.
We're still working the case, but in my mind, there's no doubt of her involvement. We just need to keep going. We want to get as much information and enough evidence as we can so it leaves no doubt with anyone that could be in this jury. Her background, from what we dug into, it seemed normal, but ultimately we'd found out in the prior months of this there was a lot of deception going on with Deborah.
She was a consistent manipulator and liar, and she certainly was engaged in some real manipulation related to false allegation of rape.
With Deborah Frazier awaiting trial for the murder of her boyfriend, Tom Waddell, investigators spend the next several months shoring up the case for prosecutors. As they dig deeper into Deborah's life, they find a long history of lies and manipulation.
We went and talked to her dad at one point, and he had basically explained that because of her, there were allegations brought on he and his late wife.
We found the call where she had alleged some abuse on her parents that was unfounded. So they really didn't have a good relationship.
As the investigation was progressing, we were contacted by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, and they had been investigating a rape allegation that she made that happened at Dillon State Park.
She stated that a man came up to her and tried to pull her pants off and used a knife to threaten her with it. She has a mark on her that was superficial, but it was not a substantial injury.
They had found out a number that she claimed to be a witness was actually a fake number that she created that came back to her Gmail account.
Don't know that I've ever dealt with a person who was so dishonest and so manipulative with so many people over such a long period of time.
It was just amazing how far that she had got in this fantasy world that she was living in.
Prosecutors theorized that Tom's discovery Deborah was draining his bank account led to his death.
I ultimately think what caused Deborah to snap was that another world of lies was collapsing around her. She had Mr. Anderson as a boyfriend. She had Mr. Waddell as a boyfriend. They didn't know about each other, but she was using Mr. Waddell's resources to live. And those resources had slowly been drained off. When that was discovered, she was going to be exposed as being a fraud, and she couldn't have that happen.
I also think that there was kind of a heartbreak story behind it. We found in the living room a bunch of torn up pictures of Tom and Deborah. Whether it was Tom, whether it was Deborah, I'm not real sure, but there was some kind of lost love, heartache there.
Every conclusion that we've made about her motives are conclusions that we drew from the evidence at the scene and all the collected data, but it's never been actually explained by Deborah herself.
In March 2024, Deborah Frazier decides to plead guilty instead of facing a jury.
They read the details of everything. It was gruesome and it was wrong and it was foul. And it angers me just sitting here and talking to you about it now. Like, he didn't deserve that. No one deserves that.
She is sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 23 years.
I would have liked to seen life, no parole, but at the end of the day, she's behind bars and she can't hurt anybody. I try to honor my father's memory by teaching my kids and raising my kids the way he taught me. Do unto others as you want them to do to you. Try to solve problems by talking. Be laid back, have fun. Just be a good person.
One of the last messages my dad sent to me, he was telling me how proud that he was of me for being the mom that I was to the boys that I have. My boys loved him so much, so this hit them hard too. So I talk about him when I can, but it's still really fresh, so it's still really hard.
On a cold winter morning in Ontario, nothing about Colonel Russell Williams suggested danger. The driveway outside his house was neat. The lawn, even under a layer of frost, looked carefully maintained. His neighbors knew him as a disciplined military officer. His colleagues described him as professional, intelligent, and dependable. His uniform carried decades of achievement. His rank commanded respect. His name opened doors. To the people who saw him in public, Russell Williams represented everything Canadians expected from a senior military leader. He shook hands with politicians. He stood beside generals. He attended official ceremonies. He appeared in photographs with members of the royal family. His posture was straight. His words were measured. His smile was calm and controlled. If someone had told those people that one of the most disturbing predators in modern Canadian history was standing right in front of them, they would have laughed in disbelief. Because monsters are supposed to look like monsters. Russell Williams did not. That was exactly what made him so terrifying. For years, while the public saw an accomplished officer rising through the ranks of the Canadian forces, another life was unfolding behind closed doors. A hidden life. A secret life. A life built on obsession. A life that grew darker with every passing year. The story did not begin with murder. It began with silence. The silence of empty houses. The silence of bedrooms after their owners had left for work. The silence of suburban neighborhoods where people felt safe enough to leave their curtains open at night. Somewhere inside that silence, Williams discovered something that awakened a dangerous part of himself. At first, nobody noticed. A missing item here. A misplaced object there. A drawer slightly different from the way it had been left. Small details that most people dismissed as simple forgetfulness. Life moved on. No alarms were raised. No one imagined that an intruder had been standing inside their home, watching, touching, searching, taking pieces of their private lives. The homes were not chosen at random. The victims were not random either. William studied them. He observed routines. He learned schedules. He memorized habits. He knew when a house would be empty. He knew when nobody would be looking. Then he would enter. Not to steal money. Not to steal jewelry. Not to steal electronics. Instead, he took deeply personal items. Objects connected to identity and intimacy. objects that transformed an ordinary burglary into something far more disturbing. And after each intrusion, he left with more than souvenirs. He left with power. Power over people who never even knew he had been there. Power over secrets they never intended to share. Power over lives he had entered without permission. The hidden collection began to grow. Photographs, clothing, records, memories of crimes committed in complete silence. Every successful intrusion seemed to push him further. The boundary between fantasy and reality became thinner. The risk became greater. The behavior became bolder. And eventually, the obsession evolved. Predators rarely stop when their methods continue to satisfy them. They adapt. They escalate. They seek stronger experiences. More control. More excitement. More dominance. Investigators would later look back and see a progression that now seemed obvious. But at the time, nobody could see the entire picture. The crimes were scattered. The victims were isolated. The clues were buried beneath ordinary life. Meanwhile, Russell Williams continued his public career. He attended meetings. He commanded personnel. He made decisions affecting military operations. People trusted him. People admired him. People saluted him. Every morning, he put on a uniform that symbolized honor. Every evening, he carried secrets that symbolized something very different. The contradiction was almost impossible to comprehend. How could one person live two entirely separate lives? How could a respected leader become a predator after dark? Those questions would haunt Canada for years. Then came November 2009. The first death. The first moment when the hidden darkness crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. 27-year-old Marie-France Comeau was found dead inside her own home. She was young. She was serving her country. She had plans for the future. Family members and friends suddenly found themselves trapped inside a nightmare they could not understand. Investigators arrived. Questions multiplied. But answers remained elusive. The crime scene offered only fragments. Pieces of a puzzle with most of its edges missing. Who would want to harm her? Why had she been targeted? What had happened inside those walls? The community searched for explanations. None seemed to fit. The killer remained invisible. And somewhere beyond the reach of suspicion, Russell Williams continued living his ordinary life. Months passed. Winter tightened its grip on Ontario. Snow-covered roads and rooftops. The world looked peaceful. Yet another victim was already being watched. Another life was being studied. Another routine was being memorized. Jessica Lloyd had no idea that someone had become obsessed with her. She had no idea that her movements were being tracked. No idea that someone was quietly building a map of her life. The danger was already approaching. Step by step. Day by day. Closer. And then, on the night of January 28th, 2010, everything changed. Jessica disappeared. The news spread quickly through Belleville. Friends called her phone. Family members searched for information. Co-workers worried. Hours turned into days. Days turned into desperate uncertainty. Missing person posters appeared. Television reports followed. Volunteers searched fields and roads. People hoped. People prayed. People refused to imagine the worst. But investigators were beginning to fear a terrible possibility. Somewhere out there, a predator was operating. A predator who understood patience. A predator who understood planning. A predator who knew how to blend into society. What nobody realized was that this predator was not hiding in the shadows of the criminal underworld. He was hiding in plain sight. Behind military decorations. Behind polished speeches. Behind a carefully constructed reputation. As the search for Jessica intensified, pressure mounted on investigators. Every clue mattered. Every witness statement mattered. Every tire mark, every footprint, every unusual detail became important. The clock was ticking. And somewhere, the man responsible continued his daily routine, as if nothing had happened. Perhaps that is the most chilling part of this story. Not the crimes themselves. Not the evidence that would eventually emerge. Not even the shocking discoveries waiting inside Williams' home. The most chilling part is how ordinary everything appeared. Neighbors saw nothing unusual. Colleagues noticed nothing suspicious. Communities carried on with daily life. The monster was never hiding in a dark alley. He was attending meetings, giving orders, wearing a uniform, smiling for cameras. For years, the disguise worked perfectly, until one investigation began connecting dots that nobody else had noticed. A pattern started to emerge. Small details became larger. separate incidents suddenly appeared connected. And investigators found themselves moving toward a truth so unbelievable that many struggled to accept it. The answer they were searching for would not lead them to a career criminal. It would lead them to one of the most respected military officers in the country. And when that truth finally surfaced, Canada would discover that some of the most dangerous predators are not the ones who look threatening. They are the ones who look trustworthy, the ones who blend into the crowd, the ones who stand in positions of authority while carrying darkness no one else can see. Before this story ends, detectives will uncover thousands of stolen photographs, hidden trophies, secret obsessions, years of carefully concealed crimes, 2 murders, multiple sexual assaults, more than 80 break-ins, and a double life so shocking that it would shake public confidence across the nation. But at the beginning of this story, none of that was visible. There was only a missing woman, a growing investigation, and a decorated colonel whose carefully constructed world was about to collapse. Long before the headlines, before the interrogation room, before investigators uncovered thousands of hidden photographs and enough evidence to shock an entire nation, Russell Williams was simply a boy growing up in Canada. Nothing in his early years seemed to predict the nightmare that would one day unfold. The neighborhoods where he spent his childhood were quiet. The kind of places where people waved to their neighbors while mowing their lawns. The kind of places where children rode bicycles through suburban streets and parents believed they knew exactly where their sons and daughters were. Canada in the 1960s and 1970s projected an image of stability and safety. Communities felt connected. Trust was woven into everyday life. Doors were sometimes left unlocked. People recognized each other's cars. Suspicion was rare. It was within this environment that Russell Charles Williams was born in 1963. As the years passed, he appeared to follow a path that many parents would have admired. He was intelligent, disciplined, organized. Teachers described him as capable. Peers often remembered him as someone who rarely drew negative attention to himself. He was not known as a troublemaker. He was not the rebellious teenager who constantly fought authority. Instead, he seemed comfortable within structured environments. That detail would later become deeply significant. Because Russell Williams did not reject systems. He excelled within them. He learned how institutions worked. He understood expectations. He mastered appearances. And perhaps most importantly, he learned how to present exactly the image that people wanted to see. As a young man, Williams developed an interest in aviation. The military offered a world built on order, hierarchy, discipline, and achievement. For someone who valued structure, it was an ideal environment. His career advanced steadily. Year after year, promotion followed promotion. Assignments became increasingly important. Responsibilities grew. His reputation strengthened. Colleagues saw competence. Superiors saw leadership potential. Subordinates saw confidence. By all outward appearances, Russell Williams was becoming a remarkable success story. The Canadian Forces rewarded that success. The further he climbed, the more respect he earned. The more respect he earned, the less likely anyone was to question him. Eventually, Williams reached one of the most prestigious positions in the country. He became commander of CFB Trenton. For those unfamiliar with Canadian military operations, CFB Trenton was not just another base. It was one of the most important military installations in Canada. Aircraft came and went constantly. Personnel moved through its facilities every day. Major operations were coordinated there. National responsibilities passed through its command structure. Being chosen to lead such a base represented extraordinary trust. The appointment was not handed out casually. It was earned through decades of service. And Russell Williams appeared to embody everything that position demanded. When journalists photographed him, they saw a polished officer. When military leaders spoke about him, they spoke with respect. When members of the public encountered him, they saw professionalism. His uniform carried symbols of accomplishment. His posture reflected confidence. His career looked almost flawless. Yet while one life was unfolding in public view, another life was developing entirely out of sight. That second life remained hidden. Not because it was small, not because it was insignificant, but because it existed behind carefully closed doors. The contrast between those two worlds would eventually become one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. During the day, Williams participated in military ceremonies. He attended official functions. He interacted with government officials. He represented the Canadian Forces. At night, another reality waited. A reality nobody around him could see. A reality built upon secrecy. To understand how shocking the future revelations would become, it is important to understand the environment surrounding him. Ontario, particularly the communities connected to this story, was not a place where residents expected to encounter a predator hiding among them. Belleville, Tweed, Ottawa, Trenton, and surrounding areas were filled with ordinary people living ordinary lives. Families raised children. Couples planned futures. Workers commuted to jobs. Military personnel served their country. Life followed familiar routines. In many ways, that normality became one of the story's most tragic elements. Because predators often thrive where trust exists. They operate in spaces where people assume safety. They rely upon the expectation that danger comes from somewhere else. Someone else. Not from a respected colonel. Not from a decorated officer. Not from a man who stood in front of cameras wearing medals. As the 2000s progressed, Russell Williams continued advancing professionally. Meanwhile, subtle warning signs were developing beneath the surface. Not warning signs visible to the public. Not warning signs that would immediately trigger alarm. Instead, they existed within a private world hidden from view. Experts who later studied the case often described an escalation pattern. The progression did not begin with violence. It began with intrusion, with boundaries being crossed, with secret behavior that gradually intensified over time. What makes such cases difficult to detect is that escalation rarely happens all at once. It unfolds gradually. One decision leads to another. One violation becomes easier after the previous one. Each successful act reduces internal resistance. The behavior becomes normalized within the offender's mind. From the outside, everything still appears normal. Inside, something very different is happening. By the late 2000s, Russell Williams occupied an extraordinary position in Canadian society. Few people enjoyed the level of trust that he possessed. His military career gave him credibility. His rank gave him authority. His reputation gave him protection. People naturally assumed he was exactly who he appeared to be. That assumption would later become a source of national shock. Because the crimes eventually uncovered did not fit the image. Nothing about the public version of Russell Williams seemed compatible with what investigators would discover. The disconnect was almost impossible to comprehend. How could someone command military personnel during the day and secretly stalk victims at night? How could someone entrusted with national responsibilities simultaneously engage in criminal behavior? How could two identities exist within one person without collapsing? These questions would dominate public discussion once the truth emerged. But during those years, no one was asking them. The truth remained hidden. The future victims had never heard his name. The communities around him felt safe. His colleagues continued to respect him. His career continued to flourish. The stage was being set for a catastrophe that nobody could yet imagine. Looking back now, there is an eerie quality to photographs from that period. Images that once represented success acquired an entirely different meaning after the arrests. A smiling officer standing proudly beside military aircraft. A respected commander attending formal events. A trusted leader shaking hands with officials. The photographs did not change. But the way people saw them changed forever. Because once the hidden reality became visible, every image seemed to contain a secret. Every smile appeared different. Every achievement felt shadowed. Every success became intertwined with the darkness that had existed unnoticed behind it. Yet at this point in the story, that darkness remained concealed. The public knew only the decorated colonel, the accomplished commander, the respected military leader. Nobody knew that a dangerous obsession was already growing. Nobody knew that homes were being entered. Nobody knew that private lives were being invaded. Nobody knew that a predator was quietly moving through Ontario under the protection of one of the most respected uniforms in the country. And nobody could have imagined that the crimes were only beginning. Because somewhere behind the polished image of Colonel Russell Williams, an obsession was evolving. Slowly, secretly, relentlessly. And before long, that obsession would move beyond burglary, beyond voyeurism, beyond fantasy, toward violence, toward murder, toward a series of crimes that would ultimately expose one of the most shocking double lives in Canadian history. Before investigators learned the full truth about Russell Williams, before the tire tracks, before the interrogation, before the nation discovered the hidden crimes concealed behind a decorated military career, There were victims whose lives deserved to be known for far more than the tragedy that eventually brought their names into the headlines. The story of this case is often told through the shocking contrast between a respected colonel and the crimes he committed. But at the center of every true crime story are the people whose futures were stolen. People who laughed, dreamed, worried, planned, and loved. People who woke up each morning expecting another ordinary day. People who never imagined they were being watched. Among those lives was Jessica Lloyd. At 27 years old, Jessica lived in Belleville, Ontario. Friends remembered her smile first. It was the kind of smile that arrived easily and made other people feel comfortable. She possessed a warmth that drew people toward her. Not because she demanded attention, but because she genuinely cared about those around her. Jessica worked hard. She had ambitions. She had plans for the future. Like many young adults, she was building a life one step at a time. Her days followed familiar routines. Work, friends, family. Simple moments that seemed ordinary at the time. The kinds of moments people rarely appreciate until they are gone. Those who knew Jessica often described her as kind-hearted. Someone who could make people laugh during difficult days. Someone who remembered birthdays. Someone who checked on friends when they were struggling. Someone who carried light into rooms without even trying. Her home reflected that personality. It was not extravagant. It was not designed to impress strangers. It was a personal space built around comfort and familiarity. A place where she could return after work and simply be herself. The walls held pieces of her life. Photographs. Memories. Objects connected to people she loved. Like millions of other homes across Canada, it represented safety. A private world protected from the outside. At least, that was what Jessica believed. What she could not know was that someone had already begun paying attention to her. Someone she had never invited into her life. Someone who had quietly turned her into a target. As investigators would later discover, Russell Williams did not choose his victims randomly. He watched. He studied. He gathered information. He observed habits. He learned routines. The process was methodical, calculated, patient. For Jessica, that meant ordinary moments were being transformed into something sinister without her knowledge. A trip to work. An evening at home. A drive through town. Activities she considered routine were becoming pieces of information collected by a predator. That reality remains one of the most disturbing aspects of the case. Jessica never knew she was under observation. She never had the opportunity to recognize the danger approaching. She never received a warning. While Jessica was living her life, another victim's story had already come to a tragic end. Marie-France Comeau was 27 years old. Like Jessica, she was young. Like Jessica, she had a future ahead of her. Like Jessica, she became the focus of Russell Williams' obsession. Marie-France served in the Canadian military. Those who knew her described a woman who worked hard and cared deeply about the people around her. She had goals. She had relationships. She had dreams extending far beyond the boundaries of military service. Her family remembered her laughter. Friends remembered her loyalty. Colleagues remembered her dedication. She represented the kind of person communities are proud to claim as one of their own. Her life was filled with ordinary details that become precious after loss. Phone calls with loved ones. Conversations about future plans. Daily routines repeated. So often they seemed permanent. The tragedy of violent crime often lies within those interrupted routines. A future suddenly erased. Plans left unfinished. Conversations that unknowingly become the last. For Marie-France's loved ones, there was no reason to suspect that danger was waiting nearby. She lived a life that appeared stable, predictable, safe. The community surrounding Canadian Forces Base Trenton was accustomed to military life. Personnel came and went. Families built homes. Friendships formed. People trusted one another. That trust was part of daily life. It was also something Russell Williams understood deeply. He understood how people viewed him. He understood the respect attached to his position. He understood that his rank created assumptions. Those assumptions became an invisible shield. A shield that protected him from suspicion while his victims remained unaware of the danger. When people later tried to understand the case, many focused on Williams. His psychology. His behavior. His secrets. But for the families of Jessica Lloyd and Marie-France Comeau, the story was never really about him. It was about absence. The empty chair at family gatherings. The unanswered phone call. The birthday that arrived without celebration. the future that suddenly disappeared. Every victim leaves behind a circle of grief. Parents, siblings, friends, co-workers, neighbors. Each person carries a different piece of the loss. Some remember childhood memories. Others remember recent conversations. Some struggle with unanswered questions. Others replay final interactions again and again, wondering if they missed something, wondering if they could have changed the outcome. The painful truth is that they could not. Neither Jessica nor Marie France caused what happened to them. Neither woman invited danger into her life. The responsibility belonged entirely to the person who chose to target them. As investigators later reconstructed events, they discovered how carefully Williams selected and monitored victims. The process was not impulsive. It involved preparation, observation, patience. The women were living normal lives while someone secretly transformed them into subjects of obsession. That hidden reality created an additional layer of horror. The victims were not simply attacked. They were studied. Their privacy was violated long before the crimes themselves occurred. For many Canadians, learning this detail changed the way they viewed the case. The murders were horrific. But the stalking, the surveillance, the secret observation revealed a level of predatory behavior that felt deeply unsettling. It suggested a person who derived satisfaction not only from committing crimes, but from controlling information and maintaining hidden power over others. Meanwhile, the victims remained completely unaware. Jessica continued making plans. Marie France continued building her future. Neither could know that their names would one day become known across the country. Neither could know that investigators, journalists, and criminologists would spend years examining the circumstances surrounding their deaths. What remains most important is remembering who they were before that happened. Jessica was not simply a victim. She was a daughter, a friend, a co-worker, a woman with dreams and ambitions. Marie France was not simply a headline. She was a military member, a loved one, a young woman with a future that mattered. Too often, notorious criminals become the focus of public attention, while the people they harmed fade into the background. But the true heart of this story belongs to the victims. Because while Russell Williams spent years constructing a hidden life built on secrecy and obsession, Jessica Lloyd and Marie France Comeau spent those same years doing something far more meaningful. They were living. They were creating memories. They were building relationships. They were making plans for futures they fully expected to reach. And as this story moves toward the events that changed everything, it is important to remember them not for the way their lives ended, but for the lives they were living before darkness entered the picture. The headlines would eventually tell the world how they died. But the people who loved them remembered something far more important: how they lived. The winter of 2009 settled heavily over Ontario. Snow covered rooftops and fields in a thick white blanket. The trees stood motionless beneath grey skies. Breath turned into mist in the freezing air. The roads glittered under streetlights after sunset, and most people hurried home before the temperature dropped even further. For thousands of residents, it was simply another Canadian winter. For Russell Williams, it was the season in which fantasy crossed a line into irreversible reality. By late 2009, the secret world he had spent years constructing had grown darker than ever before. The break-ins had become routine. The stolen clothing, the hidden photographs, the private trophies, the sense of power he experienced from entering homes unnoticed. What had once been enough no longer satisfied him. Like many offenders who escalate over time, the boundaries that once existed inside his mind had begun to erode. The thrill that came from trespassing was fading. The need for greater control was growing. And somewhere within that dangerous progression, another step was taken. A step that would eventually lead to murder. On November 24, 2009, 27-year-old Marie France Comeau finished another ordinary day. Nothing about that day suggested it would be her last. Like countless evenings before it, life moved according to familiar routines. The small details that fill every normal day seemed insignificant at the time. Conversations, messages, plans, tasks that could always be finished tomorrow. The assumption that another morning would come. That assumption is one of the quiet promises life gives all of us. Most people never imagine it can suddenly disappear. As darkness settled over the community, Marie France returned to her home. Outside, winter winds moved through the neighborhood. Inside, everything appeared calm. Safe. Normal. But somewhere nearby, a predator had already made his decision. Investigators would later discover that Williams had been stalking victims long before he physically approached them. He observed. He planned. He learned routines. He preferred control. He preferred certainty. The attack that followed was not a spontaneous explosion of violence. It was the culmination of an obsession that had been building for years. That night, the safety of Marie France's home was shattered. The place where she should have been protected became the scene of unimaginable violence. Details revealed later during the investigation painted a chilling picture. The offender entered her personal space, a space filled with ordinary reminders of daily life, the things people surround themselves with when they believe they are secure. Photographs, furniture, personal belongings, all of it suddenly transformed into silent witnesses. The struggle that followed was brief but devastating. When it ended, Marie France Comeau was dead. The killer left. The darkness outside swallowed him once again. And by the following morning, the world continued moving as though nothing had happened. Cars drove through icy streets. People went to work. Coffee shops opened their doors. The sun rose over snow-covered neighborhoods. Yet inside one home, an entire future had vanished. The discovery of Marie France's death shocked investigators. Violent crimes of this nature were not common within the community. Questions emerged immediately. Who had done this? Why had she been targeted? What connection existed between the victim and the offender? At first, answers were scarce. The crime scene revealed fragments, but not a complete story. Detectives began the difficult process of gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and reconstructing timelines. Yet despite their efforts, the killer remained unidentified. Meanwhile, Russell Williams continued living his public life. He attended meetings. He wore his uniform. He fulfilled military responsibilities. No visible sign connected him to the tragedy. To everyone around him, he remained Colonel Williams. Respected, trusted, admired. The contrast was almost impossible to comprehend. A grieving family searched for answers, while the man responsible continued moving freely through society. Weeks passed, then months. And during those months, something deeply troubling occurred. The successful concealment of the first murder appeared to reinforce Williams' confidence. The hidden double life continued. The fantasies intensified. The need for control deepened. The predator had learned a dangerous lesson. He believed he could get away with it. That belief would lead to another victim. Jessica Lloyd lived in Belleville, Ontario. Friends described her as cheerful and caring. She had her own routines, her own dreams, her own plans for the future. Unknown to her, Russell Williams had already begun watching. The surveillance was methodical, patient, calculated. He observed her movements. He studied her schedule. He learned when she left for work, when she returned home, when she was likely to be alone. Every observation added another piece to the map he was creating. Jessica never saw him, never suspected him, never knew she had become the focus of someone's obsession. January 2010 brought bitter cold to Ontario. Snowbanks lined roadsides. Night arrived early. Windows glowed warmly against the darkness. Inside her home, Jessica continued living what she believed was an ordinary life. Then came the night of January 28th. The night everything changed. The neighborhood was quiet. The kind of quiet that often accompanies winter evenings. Most residents were indoors, watching television, preparing for bed, spending time with family. Outside, the freezing air settled over the streets. Inside Jessica's home, there was no reason to expect danger. Yet danger had already arrived. At some point during the night, Williams entered the house. The intrusion was deliberate, controlled, the product of extensive planning. What followed would later become one of the most horrifying chapters in modern Canadian criminal history. Jessica was confronted inside the place she should have been safest. The attacker had chosen every detail carefully. He wanted control. He wanted dominance. He wanted power over another human being. Investigators later learned that Jessica was abducted from her home and transported to another location. For her family, the following hours became a nightmare of uncertainty. Phone calls went unanswered. Messages received no reply. Concern slowly transformed into fear. As time passed, the possibility that something terrible had happened became harder to ignore. Friends reached out. Relatives searched for information. Questions multiplied. No one knew where Jessica was. No one knew what had happened. While loved ones desperately searched for answers, Williams attempted to continue his ordinary life. That ability to separate public appearance from private reality would become one of the defining features of the case. The contrast was chilling. A respected military commander, carrying out daily responsibilities while concealing crimes of extraordinary brutality. The search for Jessica quickly expanded. Investigators mobilized resources. Volunteers joined efforts. Communities rallied together. Hope remained alive. Many people believed she could still be found. Many refused to consider the worst possible outcome. But behind the scenes, detectives were beginning to recognize disturbing similarities between Jessica's disappearance and other incidents. Patterns were emerging. Connections were forming. The investigation was moving toward a truth nobody expected. A truth hidden behind medals, military rank, and a carefully maintained reputation. For years, Russell Williams had successfully balanced two identities. One admired, one monstrous. But every secret life eventually begins to crack. Every carefully constructed illusion eventually encounters reality. And somewhere within the growing investigation, the first fractures had already begun to appear. The crimes themselves had been committed. The victims had been chosen. The damage was irreversible. But the hunt for the predator responsible was only beginning. And soon, the evidence he believed was hidden would start leading investigators directly toward him. The disappearance of Jessica Lloyd transformed almost immediately from a missing person case into something far more urgent. The first hours were filled with uncertainty. Friends called her phone repeatedly. Family members checked with coworkers. People searched for ordinary explanations. Perhaps she had gone somewhere unexpectedly. Perhaps her phone battery had died. Perhaps there had been a misunderstanding. Those possibilities are often the first refuge of hope. When someone suddenly vanishes, loved ones cling to explanations that allow them to believe everything will soon return to normal. But as the hours stretched into a full day, concern began to deepen. Jessica was dependable. She stayed in contact with people. She did not simply disappear without telling anyone. The silence surrounding her absence felt wrong. By the time investigators became heavily involved, that feeling had spread through the entire community. Something was not right. Winter gripped Belleville with its usual intensity. Snow-covered fields and roadsides. Trees stood motionless beneath grey skies. Search teams moved through the cold landscape, bundled against the wind, looking for any sign that could explain what had happened. Volunteers joined officers. Community members organized efforts. Everyone wanted the same outcome. They wanted Jessica found alive. Hope remained fragile but powerful. At the same time, detectives began focusing on the place where she had last been seen. Her home. At first glance, the residence appeared ordinary. There were no shattered windows. No dramatic signs of destruction. No obvious evidence that would immediately reveal what had occurred. But crime scene investigators understand that important clues rarely announce themselves. The smallest detail can change an entire investigation. Every room was examined carefully. Every object documented. Every surface inspected. What investigators discovered suggested that Jessica had not simply decided to leave. Something had happened inside that home. Something serious. The evidence pointed toward an intrusion. An event that had interrupted her normal routine. An event she had not planned for. As detectives worked through the scene, they began reconstructing her final known movements. Phone records were reviewed. Witness statements were collected. Timelines were assembled. Each new piece of information narrowed the possibilities. Jessica had vanished under circumstances that increasingly suggested criminal involvement. The pressure on investigators intensified. Media attention grew. The public followed every update. The uncertainty was becoming unbearable for those closest to her. Meanwhile, another investigation remained unresolved. The murder of Marie-France Comeau. Months had passed since her death, yet detectives still lacked the breakthrough they desperately needed. At first, the two cases appeared separate. Different victims, different circumstances, different timelines. But experienced investigators understand that patterns often emerge only after enough information is collected. As evidence accumulated, similarities began to attract attention. Subtle similarities. Not enough to prove a connection. Not yet, but enough to raise questions. Questions that would eventually become critical. Detectives expanded their efforts. They examined reports of suspicious activity. They reviewed unsolved break-ins. They searched for common elements. The work was painstaking. Hours turned into days. Days became weeks. Every lead had to be followed. Every possibility explored. Most of those leads went nowhere. That is the reality of major investigations. For every useful clue, there are dozens that lead to dead ends. Yet investigators continued moving forward. Slowly, methodically, patiently. Then another category of crime began attracting renewed attention. Residential break-ins. Not ordinary burglaries. These incidents were unusual. The intruder often entered homes occupied by women. Valuable items were frequently ignored. Instead, personal belongings were taken. Clothing, undergarments, private possessions. The pattern was disturbing. Many victims never realized they had been specifically targeted. Some only discovered the intrusion after noticing missing items. Others remained unaware until police contacted them later. At the time, these offenses appeared isolated, embarrassing, disturbing, but perhaps unrelated to murder. Yet investigators could not ignore the similarities. Someone was invading private spaces. Someone was fixated on women. Someone was taking risks that appeared to be increasing over time. The possibility of escalation became impossible to dismiss. As detectives mapped incidents across Ontario, a picture slowly began forming. Locations were compared. Dates were analyzed. Geographic patterns were studied. The offender appeared organized. Careful. Selective. Not impulsive. The crimes suggested planning. That realization shifted the investigation. Detectives were no longer simply searching for a random offender. They were hunting someone who invested time and effort into choosing victims. Someone who prepared. Someone who observed. Someone who learned routines before acting. The search became more focused. Then came one of the most important discoveries in the entire case. Near some of the crime scenes, investigators identified tire impressions. At first, they seemed like minor details. Roads contain countless tire marks. Most lead nowhere. But these impressions possessed characteristics that allowed forensic specialists to study them closely. Investigators compared measurements, patterns, wear marks, damage signatures. Each tire develops unique characteristics over time. Tiny imperfections become identifiers, almost like fingerprints. The forensic analysis revealed something remarkable. The same tire characteristics appeared in multiple locations connected to the investigation. That meant the same vehicle might have been present. Suddenly, detectives had something tangible. A trail. Not a complete answer, but a trail. The challenge now was identifying the vehicle. Investigators began comparing tire evidence with thousands of possibilities. The process required patience and precision. They examined records, vehicle registrations, potential matches. Every possibility had to be considered. At this stage, nobody expected where the trail would lead. Nobody imagined that the owner of the vehicle would be a senior military officer. Nobody imagined that one of Canada's most respected colonels was about to emerge as a suspect. The evidence, however, did not care about reputations. It did not care about rank. It did not care about public image. Evidence follows facts. And the facts were leading somewhere very specific. As investigators moved closer to identifying the vehicle, they simultaneously expanded their understanding of the offender's behavior. The pattern of break-ins was no longer viewed as isolated misconduct. It appeared to be part of a progression from voyeurism, to intrusion, to theft, to increasingly serious crimes. That progression terrified investigators. Because if the theory was correct, the offender had been escalating for years. The murders might not represent the beginning of the story. They might represent the latest chapter. The implications were chilling. Each new discovery increased urgency. Detectives understood that if the offender remained free, additional victims could be at risk. Time mattered. Every hour mattered. Every decision mattered. The search intensified. Meanwhile, the public remained unaware of how close investigators were getting. Most people still believed the offender could be almost anyone. A stranger passing through town. A repeat criminal with a violent history. Someone already known to police. Few imagined that the truth was hiding behind military medals and professional achievements. Yet the gap between suspicion and certainty was shrinking. Investigators could feel it. The evidence was beginning to align. Patterns were becoming clearer. Connections were strengthening. What had started as separate mysteries was slowly converging into a single path. A path that led toward one man. One vehicle. One secret life. And one revelation so shocking that it would soon shake Canada from coast to coast. The discovery phase of the investigation was nearing its most important moment. Detectives had followed the evidence through frozen fields, crime scenes, witness statements, forensic reports, and countless hours of analysis. Now the pieces were beginning to fit together. The predator who had hidden behind authority and respect for years was no longer invisible. He simply did not know it yet. And somewhere beyond the public eye, investigators were preparing to take the next step. The step that would transform a respected colonel into the primary suspect in one of the most notorious criminal investigations in Canadian history. By early February 2010, investigators found themselves standing at a crossroads. For weeks, they had been chasing fragments. A footprint here, a witness statement there, a missing woman, an unsolved murder, a series of strange break-ins that seemed unrelated at first glance. Individually, none of those pieces provided a complete answer. Together, however, they were beginning to form something far more significant. A pattern. And patterns are often where major investigations are won. The search for Jessica Lloyd remained the highest priority. Every available resource seemed focused on finding her. Communities throughout Ontario followed news updates closely. Volunteers continued searching despite freezing temperatures. Family members endured an exhausting cycle of hope and fear. Every phone call felt important. Every rumor sparked new speculation. Every passing day increased the urgency. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, detectives worked with growing intensity. The tire track evidence remained one of the most promising leads. Specialists had spent countless hours examining impressions collected from various locations connected to the investigation. The analysis was painstaking. Every groove, every worn edge, every tiny imperfection mattered. Unlike television crime dramas, real investigations often move slowly. There are no dramatic breakthroughs appearing in a matter of minutes. Instead, progress emerges through patience, through comparison, through repetition, through thousands of small decisions made by investigators determined to uncover the truth. As detectives narrowed their search, one vehicle began attracting serious attention. A Nissan Pathfinder. At first, it was simply another name among many possibilities. Nothing more. But as additional evidence was reviewed, that possibility became increasingly difficult to ignore. Records were checked. Locations were compared. Movements were analyzed. Gradually, the vehicle moved from possibility to probability. Then investigators discovered something even more surprising. The owner of the vehicle was not an individual with a lengthy criminal history. Not a known violent offender. Not someone living on the margins of society. The vehicle belonged to Colonel Russell Williams. The reaction inside investigative circles was immediate. Confusion. Disbelief. Caution. The name was familiar. Almost everyone knew who he was. Russell Williams commanded one of the most important military bases in Canada. He was respected, decorated, trusted. His public reputation seemed completely incompatible with the crimes under investigation. For a moment, investigators were forced to confront a possibility that felt almost absurd. Could they be wrong? Could the evidence somehow be misleading them? Experienced detectives understand the danger of assumptions, whether positive or negative. A suspect's social status means nothing if the evidence points in his direction. Likewise, evidence must always be tested rigorously regardless of how convincing it initially appears. The investigation, therefore, became even more careful. Every fact had to be verified. Every conclusion had to be supported. The stakes were enormous. Accusing a senior military officer required certainty. Anything less would be irresponsible. As detectives continued their work, the evidence continued pointing toward the same individual. The tire impressions aligned. The geographical patterns aligned. The timelines aligned. One by one, barriers that might have protected Williams from suspicion began to disappear. The investigators expanded their surveillance. They gathered additional information. They monitored movements. They reviewed records. And slowly, an image began emerging. Not the image known to the public. Not the respected commander. Not the accomplished officer. A different image. A hidden one. The possibility that a predator had been operating behind an admired public persona. Still, questions remained. Investigators needed stronger evidence. They needed something that could survive scrutiny. Something undeniable. The challenge was enormous because Williams had spent years cultivating discipline. His military career had taught him organization, precision, control. Those same qualities appeared throughout his criminal behavior. He was careful, methodical, calculated. The crimes suggested planning rather than impulse. That made the investigation more difficult. Yet every offender eventually makes mistakes. Sometimes the mistake is small. Sometimes it seems insignificant at first. But once discovered, it becomes impossible to ignore. Detectives continued examining reports of break-ins connected to female victims. The more they studied those incidents, the more troubling the pattern became. These were not random burglaries. Money was rarely the objective. Jewelry was often ignored. Electronics remained untouched. Instead, the offender targeted intimate personal items. The behavior suggested obsession rather than profit, control rather than theft, psychological satisfaction rather than financial gain. Investigators began mapping the crimes chronologically. What emerged was alarming. The offenses appeared to escalate over time. Early incidents involved unlawful entry. Then came increasingly invasive behavior. Then more serious violations. Then violence. The progression fit a pattern familiar to behavioral experts. A predator testing boundaries, expanding those boundaries, pushing further each time. The possibility that the same offender was responsible for both murders became increasingly likely. If that theory was correct, then stopping him quickly became even more important. Because escalation rarely stops on its own. The pressure on investigators intensified with each passing day. Inside police headquarters, long hours became routine. Detectives reviewed evidence late into the night. Whiteboards filled with timelines. Maps displayed crime locations. Photographs covered tables. Coffee cups accumulated beside stacks of reports. Everyone understood the significance of the case. Not only because of the victims, but because of where the evidence was leading. No one wanted to believe that a senior military commander could be responsible. Yet the investigation was no longer concerned with what seemed believable. It was concerned with facts. And the facts continued accumulating. As surveillance and evidence gathering progressed, investigators became increasingly confident that they were closing in on the truth. Still, they needed one final step. A confrontation. An opportunity to place the evidence before the suspect and observe his response. Interrogations are often misunderstood. People imagine dramatic accusations and immediate confessions. Reality is usually more complex. The best interrogators are patient. They understand psychology. They understand timing. They understand when to speak and when to remain silent. The detectives preparing for that moment knew exactly who they were dealing with. Russell Williams was intelligent, experienced, accustomed to authority. He would not be easily intimidated. Any mistake could jeopardize months of investigative work. Everything needed to be carefully planned. Meanwhile, Williams continued living what appeared to be a normal life. He attended meetings, spoke with colleagues, maintained his professional responsibilities. From the outside, nothing seemed unusual. Yet investigators now viewed those ordinary activities differently. Behind every public appearance, they saw a man increasingly connected to a growing mountain of evidence. A man who did not yet realize how much detectives had learned. That contrast created an almost surreal atmosphere. The suspect remained respected by the public. But behind closed doors, law enforcement officers were preparing to challenge everything people believed about him. As February progressed, the investigation entered its most critical stage. The evidence was no longer scattered fragments. It was becoming a cohesive narrative. A narrative supported by forensic analysis, supported by timelines, supported by patterns, supported by behavior. Each new discovery reinforced the same conclusion. The walls around Russell Williams were beginning to close. Slowly, carefully, methodically. Just as he had once studied his victims, investigators were now studying him. Every movement, every connection, every inconsistency. And unlike the people he had targeted, Williams had no idea how close the truth was. Soon, he would sit across from experienced investigators. Soon, he would be confronted with evidence he believed remained hidden. Soon, one of the most shocking double lives in Canadian criminal history would begin to unravel. The investigation had moved beyond suspicion, beyond theory, beyond possibility. The breakthrough was approaching, and with it would come the moment that changed everything. The moment investigators had been building toward arrived on February 7, 2010. After weeks of gathering evidence, studying patterns, and carefully reconstructing the hidden life of Russell Williams, police finally sat across from the man they believed was responsible for a series of horrifying crimes. It was not a dramatic arrest in the street. There were no flashing lights surrounding a public spectacle. Instead, the confrontation began quietly. Inside an interview room. A controlled environment. A place where words, reactions, and small changes in behavior could reveal what a person tried desperately to hide. Russell Williams entered that room carrying the same image he had maintained for years. The image of a disciplined military officer. A man trained to remain calm under pressure. A man who had spent decades learning how to command situations. He was not the kind of suspect most people imagined when they thought about violent crime. He was not someone who looked dangerous. He did not arrive covered in suspicion. He arrived as Colonel Russell Williams, a respected figure, a senior officer, someone many people believed represented honor and responsibility. But across from him sat investigators who had spent countless hours examining the evidence. They were not looking at the uniform. They were looking at the person behind it. The interrogation was led by Detective Jim Smith of the Ontario Provincial Police. From the beginning, Smith understood the challenge. Russell Williams was intelligent. He was educated. He understood authority. He understood communication. He understood how to control his presentation. A direct accusation, too early, could cause resistance. A rushed approach could close the door before the truth emerged. So the strategy was patience. The conversation began calmly. Williams was allowed to speak. He was treated respectfully. The goal was not simply to confront him. The goal was to allow him to reveal himself. At first, Williams maintained composure. He answered questions. He remained polite. His military training was visible in every movement. His posture was controlled. His voice was measured. He appeared like someone sitting in a routine professional discussion, rather than facing accusations connected to murder. But investigators had something he could not overcome. Evidence. Piece by piece, they began introducing information. The vehicle. The locations. The timelines. The connections. Each detail represented another crack in the wall Williams had built around himself. The detectives knew that a confession would not come from pressure alone. It would come when the suspect understood that denial was no longer possible. As the interview continued, the atmosphere changed. The confident colonel who entered the room began facing a reality he could no longer ignore. The investigation had reached inside the private world he believed was hidden. The secrets were no longer his alone. The photographs, the stolen items, the break-ins, the movements, the connections to victims. Everything that had existed in darkness was now being brought into the light. Investigators described evidence that connected Williams to the crimes. They discussed the patterns that had emerged. They explained how separate investigations had slowly merged into one. For years, Williams had controlled information. He decided what people saw. He decided what people believed. But inside that interrogation room, control was slipping away. The most powerful weapon investigators possessed was not intimidation. It was certainty. They knew what they had found, and they presented it calmly. That calmness created pressure, because Williams was no longer dealing with suspicion. He was dealing with the collapse of a carefully constructed identity. The same man who had commanded military personnel now faced a situation he could not command. The conversation continued for hours. Slowly, the transformation became visible. The confident officer became increasingly uncomfortable. The controlled responses became more strained. The explanations became harder to maintain. The gap between the public image and private reality became impossible to ignore. Eventually, Williams began revealing the truth. What followed was one of the most significant confessions in Canadian criminal history. He admitted responsibility for the crimes investigators had been trying to solve. The revelation was devastating, not only because of what he confessed to, but because of who he was. The person behind the crimes had not been hiding in the shadows as a complete outsider. He had been standing in positions of trust, receiving recognition, being promoted, being celebrated, while secretly committing acts that shocked even experienced investigators. Following the interrogation, police moved quickly to search Williams' home. What they discovered there would reveal the full scale of his hidden behavior. Inside the residence was an enormous collection of evidence. Thousands of photographs, images documenting his crimes and obsessions, items taken from victims, records, files, material that showed a pattern stretching back years. For investigators, the search was like opening a door into a world that had existed beside normal life without anyone knowing. The house that appeared ordinary from the outside contained evidence of a secret existence. A private archive of violations. A record of a person who had repeatedly crossed boundaries and continued escalating. The photographs became one of the most disturbing discoveries. They demonstrated planning, preparation, repetition. This was not a single moment of loss of control. It was a pattern, a behavior developed over time. Investigators now understood that the murders were not isolated acts. They were the endpoint of a much longer progression. The crimes had evolved. The offender had evolved. The investigation had uncovered not only a murderer, but a predator whose behavior had remained hidden behind an impressive public identity. The discovery also changed the way authorities viewed the earlier break-ins. What had once seemed like separate incidents now became pieces of the same story. The stolen clothing, the private photographs, the unauthorized entries into homes. All of it connected. All of it pointed back to the same person. As the evidence continued to be analyzed, investigators confirmed the extent of Williams' crimes. He was connected to the murders of Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd. He was responsible for serious sexual offenses. He was linked to numerous break-ins. The scale of the case grew beyond what anyone initially imagined. For the public, the revelation was almost impossible to process. People struggled with the contradiction. How could someone who represented discipline and service commit such crimes? How could someone trusted with responsibility behave this way? The answer was deeply uncomfortable. Because appearances can hide reality. A uniform can conceal a person. A reputation can create trust. A successful career can exist alongside a private world that nobody sees. The investigation into Russell Williams became a reminder that evil does not always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives wearing a respected title. Sometimes it speaks politely. Sometimes it receives praise. And sometimes, the most shocking discoveries come when investigators realize the person they have been searching for was never far away. He was already inside the system. Already trusted. Already accepted. But the truth had finally emerged. The hidden life of Colonel Russell Williams was exposed. The investigation that began with missing women and unanswered questions had reached its turning point. The evidence had spoken. The mask had fallen. And Canada was about to face one of the most disturbing criminal cases in its modern history. The courtroom doors opened, and the world that had only known fragments of the story was finally forced to confront the full reality of Russell Williams' crimes. The man who once stood in front of military audiences, wearing the uniform of a senior commander, now stood before a judge as one of the most notorious criminals in Canadian history. The contrast was impossible to ignore. For years, Russell Williams represented discipline, leadership, and trust. He had commanded personnel. He had participated in official ceremonies. He had been viewed as a symbol of responsibility. Now, those same qualities that once built his reputation became part of the question facing the court. How could someone who appeared so controlled and successful commit crimes so calculated and destructive? The answer would come through the evidence. And the evidence was overwhelming. By the time the case reached court, there was little doubt about what had happened. Russell Williams had already admitted responsibility. The trial was not about discovering whether crimes occurred. It was about presenting the full scale of those crimes and ensuring justice for the victims. Families who had spent months living through confusion and pain finally saw the legal system move forward. For them, the courtroom was not simply a place where evidence was presented. It was where the names of their loved ones would be remembered. Marie-France Comeau, Jessica Lloyd, two women whose lives had been reduced to headlines by the actions of another person. The proceedings forced everyone involved to look beyond the shocking identity of the offender and focus on the damage left behind. The prosecution presented a disturbing portrait of a man whose crimes developed over time. They described a pattern, a progression, a series of choices that became increasingly serious. The break-ins, the stolen personal items, the hidden photographs, the surveillance, the attacks, the murders. Each piece added to the same conclusion. This was not a single moment of uncontrollable violence. It was a long process of escalation. The court heard how Williams carefully selected targets and invaded their privacy. The evidence showed that he had created a hidden collection documenting his actions. The photographs became one of the most disturbing parts of the case. They demonstrated that the crimes were not accidental. They reflected planning, preparation, a desire to preserve memories of the violations he committed. For the victims' families, hearing these details was painful. Every piece of evidence represented another reminder that their loved ones had suffered. Every document, every photograph, every description. Behind each piece of evidence was a person, a real life, a family, a future that had been taken away. The prosecution also focused heavily on the murders of Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd. The court heard how Williams used his position and reputation as a shield. The public saw a military officer. Investigators discovered a predator. That contradiction became one of the central themes of the case. The defense did not attempt to deny the overwhelming evidence. Instead, the legal process focused on the circumstances surrounding the crimes and the appropriate punishment. But regardless of legal arguments, one fact remained clear. 2 women were dead. Their families had suffered unimaginable loss. And the person responsible had once been someone society trusted. When the time came for sentencing, the courtroom carried the weight of everything that had happened. Judges considered not only the individual acts, but the broader pattern. The calculated nature, the planning, the impact on the victims' families, the effect on the wider community. The court recognized that Williams' crimes represented an extraordinary breach of trust. A person who had been given authority and responsibility had used his abilities in a completely opposite way. His intelligence, organization, and discipline had not prevented the crimes. They had helped conceal them. In 2010, Russell Williams received a sentence that reflected the severity of his actions. He was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murders of Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd. The punishment included a lengthy period before he could seek parole. Additional sentences were imposed for the other crimes connected to the case. The courtroom decision brought a form of closure, but not an end to the pain. For families, there is no sentence that can restore what was lost. No legal decision can bring back a daughter. No prison term can erase memories of the final moments of a loved one's life. Justice can recognize wrongdoing. It can hold someone accountable. But it cannot reverse tragedy. Outside the courtroom, the reaction across Canada was intense. Many people struggled to understand how such crimes could have remained hidden for so long. The question repeated again and again was simple. How could nobody see it? How could a person with such a respected position maintain such a disturbing secret life? The answer was uncomfortable. Because people often judge others based on the information they are given. Williams provided an image of professionalism. He followed expectations. He performed his role convincingly. The world saw what he wanted the world to see. And behind that image, the crimes continued. The case also created difficult conversations about trust within institutions. The military community was forced to examine how someone with such a high level of responsibility could commit serious offenses without detection. The story challenged assumptions about what dangerous people look like. Many expect criminals to appear obviously threatening. They imagine warning signs that are easy to recognize. But cases like this reveal something far more complicated. Sometimes danger hides behind success. Sometimes a person can appear completely ordinary while concealing a reality that is anything but ordinary. The Russell Williams case became one of the most widely discussed criminal cases in Canada, not only because of the crimes themselves, but because of the identity of the offender. A stranger committing violence is frightening. But a trusted figure committing violence creates a different kind of fear. It forces people to question how well they truly know those around them. The victims remained at the center of the courtroom story. Their lives were remembered. Their families were heard. Their suffering was acknowledged. Because beneath all the attention surrounding Russell Williams, the truth remained unchanged. The most important people in this story were never the man who committed the crimes. They were the people whose lives were destroyed by them. Marie-France Comeau had dreams. Jessica Lloyd had dreams. They had families. They had memories. They had futures. And although the world would forever associate their names with a terrible crime, those who loved them remembered something much greater. They remembered who they were before tragedy entered their lives. The sentencing of Russell Williams closed one chapter of the legal process. But the questions surrounding the case continued. Questions about hidden identities. Questions about trust. Questions about how someone could live 2 completely different lives for so long. The courtroom delivered justice. But the story of Russell Williams remained a haunting reminder that the most dangerous secrets are sometimes hidden in plain sight. Behind the uniform, behind the reputation, behind the carefully constructed image, there was a truth waiting to be uncovered. And once it was revealed, Canada would never see the case the same way again. Years after the arrest, after the trial, after the shocking revelations that changed the way many Canadians viewed trust and appearances, the name Russell Williams remained attached to one of the darkest criminal cases in the country's modern history. But time also brought a different perspective. The initial shock slowly transformed into reflection. People stopped asking only how a respected military officer could commit such crimes. They began asking deeper questions. How can someone hide a secret life for so long? How can a person appear successful, disciplined, and trustworthy while causing unimaginable harm? How do communities recognize danger when it does not look dangerous? The Russell Williams case did not end when the courtroom doors closed. Its impact continued. For the families of the victims, the story was never about the criminal alone. It was about the empty spaces left behind, the conversations that would never happen again, the celebrations that would now feel different, the future moments that would never arrive. For those who loved Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd, their memories existed beyond the tragedy. They were not defined by the crimes committed against them. They were remembered as individuals, as people who had hopes, relationships, personalities, and dreams. Marie-France was more than a victim in a criminal investigation. She was a daughter, a friend, a colleague, a woman who dedicated part of her life to serving in the Canadian military. People who knew her remembered the person she was before her name became connected to a devastating headline. Jessica Lloyd was more than the final chapter written about her. She was someone with her own story. Someone who laughed. Someone who cared about others. Someone whose life contained countless ordinary moments that mattered deeply to the people around her. Those ordinary moments are often what families miss the most. Not the dramatic memories. Not the public attention. The simple things. A conversation. A smile. A familiar voice. A routine that once seemed insignificant. After a violent crime, those small pieces of life become priceless. Meanwhile, the case continued to influence discussions about criminal behavior and hidden identities. The public was forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. People are complex. A person can present one image to the world while hiding another. Russell Williams had built a career based on discipline and responsibility. He followed rules professionally. He achieved success. He gained admiration. Yet behind that public identity existed behavior that was secret, destructive, and increasingly dangerous. That contrast became the defining element of the case. The uniform became symbolic, not because it represented the crimes, but because it represented the level of trust that had been given. A military uniform carries expectations. Honor, service, integrity. The discovery that someone wearing that uniform had committed such acts created a sense of betrayal far beyond the individual victims. It affected institutions, communities, and the public's understanding of how well we truly know the people around us. The case also highlighted the importance of recognizing patterns of behavior. The crimes did not appear overnight. They developed gradually. The break-ins, the obsession, the invasion of privacy, the collection of personal items. Each act represented another boundary crossed. Each step made the next step easier. Experts studying criminal behavior often examine this progression because escalation rarely begins with the most extreme act. It often begins with smaller violations that are ignored, hidden, or minimized. The story of Russell Williams became a disturbing example of how secret behavior can grow when it remains undiscovered. Another lasting impact of the case was the way it changed public conversations about trust. Many people found themselves looking differently at those around them. Neighbors, co-workers, people in positions of authority. The case created a painful reminder that appearances alone cannot reveal everything about a person. Someone can seem polite, successful, reliable, and still hide deeply troubling behavior. That does not mean suspicion should replace trust in everyday life. But it does show why awareness matters, why warning signs matter, why victims' experiences matter. For investigators who worked the case, the story was also a reminder of the importance of persistence. At the beginning, they faced uncertainty. A missing woman, an unresolved murder, a series of strange crimes. The answers were not obvious. The suspect was not who anyone expected. The investigation required patience, careful analysis, and the willingness to follow evidence even when it led somewhere unexpected. The breakthrough came because investigators refused to accept assumptions. They followed patterns. They examined details. They connected information that initially seemed unrelated. In the end, the evidence revealed the truth. Not the truth people wanted to believe. Not the truth that fit the public image. But the truth that existed. The case remains one of the most discussed examples in Canadian true crime history because it combines several elements that are deeply unsettling. A respected figure. A hidden criminal life. Victims who appeared completely unconnected to the offender. A shocking contrast between public reputation and private actions. But beneath all of those elements, the most important lesson is about the human cost. Behind every investigation file are real people. Behind every headline are families. Behind every crime statistic are lives permanently changed. The attention surrounding Russell Williams will likely continue for years. Documentaries will examine the case. Researchers will study it. People will continue asking how such a situation could happen. But the passage of time should not allow the victims to disappear behind the name of the offender. Because the true ending of this story is not about Russell Williams. It is about remembering those who suffered. It is about understanding the warning signs of escalating behavior. It is about recognizing the importance of protecting victims and supporting families after unimaginable loss. The story began with a man who appeared to have everything. A successful career. A respected position. A carefully built reputation. But behind that image was a reality that shocked an entire country. And when that reality was finally uncovered, Canada was left with a painful reminder. The most frightening secrets are not always hidden in dark places. Sometimes they exist behind familiar faces, behind professional titles, behind appearances that seem impossible to question. The case of Colonel Russell Williams remains a haunting chapter in Canadian history, not only because of the crimes committed, but because of the questions it left behind. Questions about trust. Questions about human behavior. Questions about the hidden worlds people can create behind closed doors. And above all, it remains a story about the lives that were lost, the families forever changed, and the importance of remembering that every victim was more than a part of a case. They were people. They mattered. And their stories deserve to be remembered. Years after the shocking revelations surrounding Russell Williams, the case continued to occupy a unique place in Canada's criminal history. Some crimes fade from public memory as years pass. Some become part of a nation's collective consciousness. This case became one of those stories. Not simply because of the violence. Not simply because of the identity of the offender. But because it challenged something many people believed about safety, trust, and the people around them. The idea that a dangerous person could exist behind a respected public image was deeply unsettling. Russell Williams had not lived as a hidden outsider. He had not avoided society. He had been part of one of Canada's most structured and respected institutions. He had been trusted. That trust became one of the most painful parts of the story. For many members of the military community, the case created a sense of disbelief that was difficult to express. The Canadian Armed Forces are built around values of responsibility, service, and commitment. The idea that someone who had risen so high within that system could secretly commit such crimes forced many people to reflect on the difference between appearance and reality. A uniform can represent honor. A position can represent achievement. A reputation can create confidence. But none of those things can reveal everything about a person's private life. The case became a reminder that understanding someone requires more than seeing their public achievements. It requires looking at behavior, looking at choices, looking at patterns. The investigation revealed that the crimes did not begin with the murders. They developed over time. That progression became one of the most disturbing aspects of the entire case. The early break-ins were not random acts of theft. They were violations of privacy. Moments where a person's sense of security was taken away without them even knowing. The offender entered spaces that were supposed to be private. He took personal items. He documented what he did. He created a hidden world built around control and obsession. At first, many of those actions remained invisible. The victims did not always know they had been targeted. Their homes appeared normal. Their daily routines continued. But behind the scenes, someone was watching. Someone was collecting information. Someone was crossing boundaries. This gradual escalation became one of the most important lessons connected to the case. Extreme crimes often have a history. They are frequently preceded by behaviors that show a person is moving toward greater levels of harm. The challenge is recognizing those warning signs before tragedy occurs. The Russell Williams case forced many people to think differently about criminal behavior. It showed that a person does not always fit the image society expects. The offender was not someone who immediately appeared dangerous. He was educated, successful, professional, calm. He knew how to interact with others. He knew how to maintain a reputation. That ability to separate public identity from private behavior made the case especially disturbing. The public often searches for obvious signs. A threatening appearance. A history of obvious violence. A person who seems different from everyone else. But cases like this reveal a more complicated reality. Sometimes the people who cause the greatest harm are capable of appearing completely ordinary. They can attend meetings, participate in community life, build careers, receive praise, and still hide actions that would shock everyone around them. The victims' families carried the heaviest burden after the case ended. A criminal trial can provide accountability. A sentence can acknowledge responsibility. But neither can erase loss. For families, grief does not follow the timeline of a courtroom. It continues quietly. In empty rooms. In memories. In moments when they instinctively want to share something with someone who is no longer there. The world continued discussing Russell Williams. But families continued remembering Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd as people. Not as evidence. Not as names in a case file. Not as headlines. They remembered personalities. Laughter. Kindness. The small details that made them unique. Those memories are what remain after tragedy. The case also influenced how people viewed investigations involving patterns of behavior. The breakthrough did not come from a single dramatic discovery. It came from many small pieces being connected. Tire evidence, digital information, behavioral patterns, investigative persistence. Every detail mattered. Every decision mattered. The investigators had to look beyond assumptions. They had to follow evidence even when it led toward an unexpected person. That is one of the most difficult parts of criminal investigation. The truth is not always comfortable. Sometimes the person responsible is exactly who people hope it is not. Sometimes the evidence forces society to question its own assumptions. The Russell Williams investigation became an example of that reality. It showed the importance of evidence over reputation, facts over appearances, truth over comfort. The case also left behind broader conversations about prevention. How can communities recognize dangerous behavior? How can victims feel supported? How can institutions identify problems before they become disasters? There are no simple answers. Human behavior is complex. People can hide intentions. People can manipulate perceptions. But awareness remains important. Listening to concerns. Taking reports seriously. Understanding patterns. Recognizing that small violations can sometimes represent larger problems. Those lessons remain relevant long after the headlines disappear. Today, Russell Williams remains one of Canada's most infamous criminals. His name is remembered because of the crimes he committed, because of the position he held, because of the shocking contrast between the person people believed they knew and the person investigators uncovered. But the lasting meaning of the case should not be centered on the offender. It should be centered on what was lost. 2 women who should have had more years, more memories, more experiences. 2 lives interrupted by choices they did not make. The most important part of any true crime story is remembering the humanity behind the events. Every investigation has evidence. Every trial has arguments. Every headline has information. But behind all of that are real people. People who loved. People who dreamed. People who mattered. The story of Russell Williams remains haunting because it revealed how easily a carefully constructed image can hide a disturbing reality. It showed that danger does not always arrive with a warning. Sometimes it arrives quietly. Sometimes it blends into everyday life. Sometimes it hides behind success and respect. And when the truth finally appears, the impact reaches far beyond one person or one crime. It changes how communities think, how institutions respond, how people understand trust. The case will continue to be studied because it represents one of the most unsettling questions in human behavior. How well can we truly know another person? The answer is uncomfortable. Because sometimes, despite years of familiarity, there are things hidden beneath the surface. Things people never see. Things they never expect. But even in a story filled with darkness, one truth remains clear. The lives of the victims mattered more than the crimes of the offender. Their memories are stronger than the actions of the person who harmed them. And their stories deserve to be remembered not because of how they ended, but because of who they were. That is the final lesson left behind by the case of Colonel Russell Williams. Behind every investigation is a human story. Behind every tragedy are people who deserved more time. And behind every headline should always be the reminder that victims are not just part of a case. They are lives. They are families. They are people who mattered. The story of Russell Williams remains one of those rare criminal cases where the truth felt almost impossible to believe. When the investigation first began, nobody expected the answer to lead to a man with such a respected background. The public often imagines criminals as people who exist outside normal society. People who are obviously dangerous. People who leave behind clear warnings. But the Williams case destroyed that simple idea. The person at the center of the investigation was not someone hiding from society. He was someone standing in the middle of it. He had responsibilities. He had authority. He had a reputation built over decades. And that was exactly what made the discovery so disturbing. The case became a study of contradiction. The contradiction between the person others believed they knew and the person who existed behind closed doors. During his military career, Russell Williams built a carefully controlled image. He was organized, professional, calm under pressure. Those qualities are valued in military leadership. A commander must make decisions. A commander must inspire confidence. A commander must appear reliable. Williams succeeded at creating that impression. People around him saw someone who seemed to have mastered his life. His career progressed. His responsibilities increased. His reputation grew. But while one version of Russell Williams was visible to the world, another version existed in secret. That hidden side was revealed slowly. Not through rumors. Not through assumptions. Through evidence. Through years of investigation. Through the careful work of detectives who followed every detail until the entire picture became clear. One of the most disturbing aspects of the case was how long the behavior continued. The crimes were not a single event. They represented a progression. A pattern that developed gradually. At the beginning, the actions involved secrecy and invasion. Entering homes. Taking personal items. Recording private moments. These acts alone represented serious violations. They showed someone willing to cross boundaries. Someone willing to enter another person's most private space and treat it as something they could control. But the most frightening part was what came after. The behavior did not stop. The boundaries continued to move. The actions became more serious, more dangerous, more destructive. For investigators studying the case, this escalation became one of the clearest signs of the offender's mindset. A person who repeatedly crosses boundaries can begin to normalize their own behavior. Actions that once seemed impossible become easier. The internal barriers that prevent most people from causing harm begin to disappear. In Williams' case, that progression eventually reached the point where two women lost their lives. Marie-France Comeau and Jessica Lloyd became the final victims of a pattern that had been developing for years. Their deaths shocked Canada, not only because of the violence involved, but because of the person responsible. The case forced many people to reconsider how they viewed trust. Many communities rely on familiarity. A person who has a good job. A person who behaves politely. A person who appears responsible. Those qualities naturally create confidence. But the Williams case showed that outward success does not always reveal inner reality. A person can perform a role convincingly. They can meet expectations. They can receive praise. And still hide behavior that nobody around them suspects. That realization created a sense of unease throughout Canada. People began looking back at the years before the crimes were discovered. They wondered about missed signs. Moments that seemed insignificant at the time. Behaviors that might have appeared strange, but harmless. This is one of the most difficult parts of understanding criminal cases after they happen. Once the truth is known, people often search for clues that should have revealed everything. But reality is more complicated. Most people do not expect someone they know to be capable of extreme harm. The mind naturally rejects possibilities that feel impossible. That is why cases like this are so unsettling. They challenge the belief that danger is always obvious. The investigation also highlighted the importance of listening to victims and taking unusual behavior seriously. The early break-ins connected to Williams might have appeared separate from the later murders. Different locations, different reports, different victims. But when investigators connected the information, they discovered a much larger story. The small pieces mattered. A missing item, a suspicious pattern, a repeated method, a connection that seemed insignificant until placed beside other evidence. Criminal investigations are often built from these small details. The final picture appears only after investigators are willing to examine every piece. The work requires patience because the truth rarely appears immediately. In the Williams case, the breakthrough came because investigators refused to separate events that shared common features. They looked beyond individual incidents. They searched for the person connecting them all. And eventually they found him. The discovery of Williams' hidden crimes also raised difficult questions about institutions. How could someone in such a respected position avoid detection? How could a person trusted with responsibility maintain a secret criminal life? These questions did not have simple answers. Large organizations are made of people, and people can hide things. The case became a reminder that systems must rely not only on trust, but also on accountability. No position should place someone beyond examination. No reputation should automatically remove suspicion. Evidence must always matter more than status. The public reaction to the case showed just how deeply people were affected. Many Canadians followed every development. They wanted to understand. They wanted explanations. They wanted to know how something like this could happen. But some questions remain difficult even years later. Because the most disturbing part of the case is not only what Russell Williams did. It is how successfully he maintained two separate identities. The respected officer and the hidden offender. Two versions of the same person existing at the same time. One visible, one concealed. That contrast is what continues to make the case unforgettable. The story of Russell Williams is not only a story about crime. It is also a story about perception. About the difference between what people see and what exists beneath the surface. It reminds society that understanding human behavior requires looking deeper than appearances. A title does not define a person. A career does not define a person. A reputation does not define a person. Actions do. And in the end, it was the evidence of those actions that revealed the truth. The investigation uncovered what had been hidden. The courtroom recognized the damage. The victims' families continued carrying the consequences. And Canada was left with a painful but important lesson. The most disturbing secrets are sometimes not found in places people expect. Sometimes they are hidden behind success, behind respect, behind a familiar face. And when those secrets are finally revealed, the impact reaches far beyond the individual responsible. It changes the way people think about trust. It changes the way institutions respond. It changes the way a society understands the hidden possibilities within human behavior. That is why the case of Colonel Russell Williams remains such a powerful and disturbing chapter in Canadian true crime history. Because it was not only about the crimes committed. It was about the illusion that everything was normal. Until suddenly it was not. The aftermath of the Russell Williams case was not measured only by the length of the investigation, the details revealed in court, or the sentence handed down. Its impact was measured by the questions that remained. Questions that did not disappear when the headlines faded. Questions about trust. Questions about hidden behavior. Questions about how someone could exist in two completely different worlds for so long. The case became more than a criminal investigation. It became a story that forced people to look at the uncomfortable space between appearance and reality. For years, Russell Williams represented success. He represented achievement. He represented the kind of person many people believed they understood. A military officer with an impressive career. A leader. A professional. Someone who had earned respect. That image made the truth even harder to accept. Because the most shocking part was not only what happened. It was who had done it. The case challenged a common belief that dangerous people can always be recognized. Many people want to believe that there are obvious signs. That someone capable of terrible actions must appear threatening. Must behave strangely. Must stand apart from everyone else. But the reality revealed by the investigation was much more complicated. Russell Williams did not appear to fit that image. He interacted with people normally. He carried out professional duties. He maintained relationships. He lived a life that, from the outside, seemed stable. That was what made the discovery so disturbing. The danger had not existed somewhere far away. It had existed close to people who never imagined they were near it. The investigation also left a lasting mark because it revealed how criminal behavior can develop over time. The murders were the most extreme acts. But they were not the beginning. Before the violence, there were smaller violations. acts that showed obsession, acts that showed a willingness to invade the lives of others, acts that demonstrated a desire for control. The progression mattered because it showed that the final crimes did not appear suddenly. They were part of a path where boundaries were crossed repeatedly. Each step created the possibility of the next one. For investigators and behavioral experts, this became one of the most important aspects of understanding the case. The question was not only what happened. The question was how it happened. How did a person move from secret violations of privacy to crimes that destroyed lives? How did someone justify those actions internally? How did a person continue living normally while carrying such a disturbing secret? Those questions remain difficult because human behavior is rarely simple. People can hide parts of themselves. They can create carefully managed images. They can present one version of who they are while concealing another. The Russell Williams case became one of the clearest examples of that reality. The public saw a commander. Investigators discovered a criminal. The difference between those two images became the center of the story. The case also had a lasting effect on the victims' families. While the public focused on the offender, the families continued living with the consequences. For them, the story did not end with a confession. It did not end with a sentence. The loss remained. Every anniversary, every memory, every moment when they wished they could speak with someone who was no longer there. Legal justice has limits. A court can determine responsibility. A court can deliver punishment. But it cannot restore what was taken. It cannot return time. It cannot repair every wound. For families, healing is not about forgetting. It is about carrying the memory of someone they loved while continuing forward. That is why remembering the victims became such an important part of the conversation surrounding the case. Because crime stories often focus heavily on the person who committed the crime. The investigation, the trial, the evidence, the shocking details. But behind every case are people whose lives existed before the tragedy. Marie France Como and Jessica Lloyd were not simply names connected to a criminal investigation. They were individuals. They had personalities. They had relationships. They had futures. Their stories existed long before they became part of one of Canada's most infamous cases. The case also influenced discussions about institutions and responsibility. Many people wondered how someone in such a high position could continue for so long without being discovered. The answer involved many factors. Trust, assumptions, the difficulty of recognizing hidden behavior, the challenge of investigating someone who appears reliable. The situation became a reminder that no person, regardless of status, should be beyond examination. Respect is earned through actions, but actions must continue to be observed over time. A position does not guarantee character. A reputation does not guarantee morality. A successful career does not reveal everything about a person's private choices. The evidence in the Williams case demonstrated this in the most painful way possible. The investigation itself also became a lesson in persistence. At the beginning, investigators faced uncertainty. They had separate pieces, separate reports, separate victims. The connection was not immediately obvious. But through careful work, those pieces began to form a larger picture. The process showed the importance of patience, the importance of following evidence, the importance of not allowing assumptions to control an investigation. Because the truth sometimes leads somewhere unexpected. Sometimes the person responsible is not who anyone imagined. Sometimes the person everyone trusts becomes the person everyone questions. That was the reality Canada faced. The case changed the way many people thought about safety. It changed the way people viewed reputation. It changed the way society understood that appearances can be misleading. But perhaps the most important lesson was about awareness. Not fear, not suspicion toward everyone, but awareness. Understanding that patterns matter. Understanding that victims deserve to be heard. Understanding that small warning signs should not always be ignored. The legacy of the Russell Williams case is complicated. It is a story of tragedy, a story of betrayal, a story of investigation, a story of justice. But above all, it is a reminder of the importance of humanity. Behind every crime statistic is a person. Behind every investigation file is a family. Behind every headline is a life that mattered. Years later, the case remains one of Canada's most disturbing criminal stories because it revealed something deeply unsettling. The person people believed they knew was not the person investigators uncovered. The image was carefully constructed. The truth was hidden. And when that truth finally came to light, it left a country asking the same question. How could someone who seemed so ordinary hide something so extraordinary? The answer may never feel completely satisfying, because some cases do not leave behind simple explanations. They leave behind lessons. Lessons about trust. Lessons about awareness. Lessons about the complexity of human behavior. And most importantly, lessons about remembering the victims whose lives were forever changed. The story of Russell Williams will continue to be studied, not because the offender deserves fascination, but because understanding such cases may help society recognize danger earlier, protect victims better, and never forget the human cost behind every crime. In the end, the strongest memory left behind should not be the image of the person who caused the harm. It should be the memory of those whose lives were taken. Because every victim was more than a case, more than evidence, more than a headline. They were people, and they mattered.